Everyone in the silo talks about the pact like it is a constitution, a rule book, a legal code, something you can study, follow, break, or enforce. And that reading makes sense. The pact defines crimes, it sets punishments, it creates procedures. Judicial officers quote it, citizens swear on it. People use it to decide who has authority, who can be searched, who can be sent away, and who is allowed to speak. So of course it looks like law. But the first thing the pact protects is not law at all. It is memory. The scariest line in Silo comes early, in the first episode. The pact is the only history they have. That sentence is the key to the whole system. A constitution tells people what they can do. The pact tells the silo what it is allowed to remember. And once you control what people remember, you do not have to control every choice by force. You have already decided what they think is possible. I am Pat, and this is MovieShows, where I dig into the movies and shows that keep unfolding after the credits end. If you like essays that make familiar stories feel strange again, subscribe. There are a lot more stories like this coming. So let us sit with that line. The pact is the only history they have. It means two things at the same time. First, the pact is treated as the record of the past. If people want to know what happened before them, what the rebellion was, what the founders wanted, or why the silo works the way it does, the pact is where authority lives. Second, it is the only history they are allowed to possess. That is the more disturbing part. Other histories do not just sit beside it, they are missing. Drives are gone, books are forbidden, relics are dangerous. Personal memory becomes suspicious the moment it reaches beyond the approved story. So the pact is not simply important, it is a replacement. It replaces archives, it replaces public memory. It replaces the possibility that the past might be argued over by ordinary people. That is why calling it law is too small. Law tells you what happens if you break the rules. The pact tells you what world you are living in. And this matters because people do not only obey laws, they inherit worlds. If the only version of the past you inherit is the pact, then the pact does not feel like one interpretation of history. It feels like reality itself. It becomes the thing everyone else already knows before you are old enough to question it. That is much harder to resist than a rule. If the pact were only law, people could argue with it. They could question a reading, challenge a clause, appeal to a principle above it. But the silo does not treat the pact like one document among many. It treats the pact like the ground under everyone's feet. That is why the rituals matter. Put Down the Rebellion Day is not just a holiday, it is a memory ceremony. It reminds the population that rebellion nearly destroyed them, that order saved them, and that the present only exists because the silo learned to fear its own past. That is not ordinary law enforcement, that is liturgy. And judicial does not function only like a police department. The show calls them the enforcers of the pact. That phrase matters. They are not just enforcing laws, they are guarding the document that defines what truth is allowed to be. When characters ask what the pact says, or place a hand on it, or swear by it, they are not only checking procedure, they are borrowing authority from a sacred text. The pact works because it gives obedience a moral shape. People are not only told to comply, they are taught that compliance is what keeps the world from falling apart. That is why even disagreement has to happen inside the language of the pact. People do not usually say, "This whole structure is false." They say, "What does the pact allow? What does the pact forbid? What process did the founders establish?" The document sets the boundaries of the argument before the argument begins. This is where the founders become important. The pact depends on them. Their names, their intentions, their supposed wisdom, and their survival story give the document its weight. In the Silo, the founders are not only historical figures, they are the source of legitimacy. People invoke them when they need a sentence to feel bigger than one person's opinion. But Season 2 cracks that authority open. The founders did not build one isolated silo. There are other silos. That revelation does not just change the map, it changes the meaning of the pact. Because if the people inside Silo 18 have been taught that their silo is the whole remaining world, then the pact is not simply incomplete, it is arranging reality around a false center. The document does not have to tell every lie directly, it only has to make every other version of history unavailable. That is how authority becomes invisible. You do not experience it as propaganda, you experience it as common sense. And the old copy of the pact makes that even more unsettling. An old copy should be boring if the pact is simply a stable legal book. But in Silo, an old copy feels dangerous. It suggests that the text has a past of its own. It hints that even the document people treat as permanent may have versions, edits, and buried context. Again, the show does not hand us the whole answer, but it makes the question dangerous. The rebellion is the pact's great explanation. Whenever the Silo talks about the past, the rebellion stands there like a wall. Records were destroyed, books disappeared, old knowledge became dangerous. The official story becomes simple. People rebelled, the Silo almost died, and the pact is what remains. The show does not give us a clean editing room scene where someone rewrites the pact after the rebellion. So we should be careful. But it does show us the aftermath, a society where the past has been narrowed to one approved document. A society where even asking where people came from can become a threat. And that is enough to see the mechanism. The rebellion does not only explain why the Silo has rules, it explains why memory itself has been put under control. The trauma makes the control feel reasonable. That is the cycle. Crisis, then order, then a generation raised to believe the order was never a choice. The pact is frightening because it is not useless. It works. It gives the Silo procedures for moments when panic could tear the structure apart. Hearings, oaths, searches, succession, punishment, cleaning. The pact gives fear a script. And in a closed world where a failed generator, a bad crop, or a riot can become survival-level danger, that script feels necessary. That is the trap. The pact does not only repress people, it organizes them. It tells them what to do when they are scared. It tells them who can speak when authority is unclear. It gives each crisis a shape before anyone inside the crisis can ask whether the shape is honest. That makes the pact more powerful than a simple lie. A lie can be exposed. A procedure can keep working even after people begin to doubt it. The pact survives because it is useful at the same time that it is false. That usefulness is what makes the system so durable. If the pact were only cruel, people could hate it cleanly. But the pact also settles disputes, preserves routines, names offices, and gives frightened people a way to move through crisis. It becomes the handrail on the staircase. You can know the staircase is inside a prison and still reach for the rail when the lights go out. The novel sharpens this, but it also needs to stay in its lane. In Wool, the pact is treated as something people study for official roles, and the text reaches into offices, relationships, work, and punishment. It is not just background lore. Book context also makes the connection between pact and order feel more explicit, but the show already gives us the core idea without needing to flatten book details into show canon. In both versions, the horror is not that a society has rules. Every society has rules. The horror is that one document has been allowed to become law, history, ritual, and identity at once. When that happens, disobedience stops looking like disagreement. It starts looking like an attack on reality itself. That is why this follows the cleaning ritual. In the first episode of this series, I argued that cleaning is not just punishment. It is the silo's final test. The system sends someone outside, but it cannot make them wipe the lens. That last gesture has to be chosen. The pact is how the silo trains that kind of choice before anyone reaches the airlock. If you grow up believing the pact is your law, your history, your safety, and your shared identity, then obedience does not always feel like surrender. It can feel like finishing the sentence your whole world has been teaching you to say. That is why the silo does not need every citizen to understand the machinery behind the lie. It only needs them to understand their role inside the story. The pact does not just tell people what to do, it tells them who they are. So the pact is not law. Law can be challenged, amended, interpreted, resisted. The pact is harder to escape because it is the story that makes argument feel impossible. The silo does not only need people to obey the pact, it needs them to believe that without the pact, there is no world left to obey. That is what the founders actually built. Not only rules, not only a government, they built a document that could replace memory. And then they taught everyone to call that replacement safety.